the lesson here, is we spend a lot of time thinking about UX from the perspective of convenience, and finding logical things that work. But the world of UX is larger than the typical things that people think about. The world of UX is everything from you seeing a screen and forming a first perception to a lot of subliminal thoughts happening in your brain that are quickly flashing through, and you can't even necessarily rationalize exactly what's happening in that split second, but you're making a decision to move on or not. And those tiny decisions compound into very large potential gains, right? But also, for a lot of these things, it's not really worth, in my opinion, to spend human hours and great minds thinking about those problems that are way bigger and complex things that humans can design. And machines are quite good at solving these types of problems. Yeah, and this is one of the directions that Data Milk believes in general, is that automation in any industry, and AI in particular is a great vehicle for automation, can drive humans towards freeing up space and time to do better, greater things.
Hello everybody, what's up? Welcome to another episode of The Link, E-Commerce Connections. In today's episode, we're going to be talking with Peter Salontai, the CEO of Data Milk. Hello Peter, welcome.
Thank you, Diego. Appreciate you having me on the show. Excited to be here.
Please, it's a pleasure. And in today's episode, we will be discussing with Peter about attention and the attention economy and how Peter has literally milked attention from e-commerce users to drive more revenue for e-commerce stores. So Peter, before we start talking about everything that you're doing at Data Milk and how you're using your algorithms and your models to literally milk attention for customers, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to how you got to Data Milk and all the journey that you went through Google and all the experiments and all the experience that you have around UX and conversion rate optimization?
Absolutely. So I've been in the game for a while now. I started actually as a mathematician. I went to a university in the States called UCLA, and I had a mathematics degree from there. But it was an interesting time to be there because there was a particular professor by the name of Terence Tao. He's a distinguished mathematician who at the time won a really famous mathematics challenge, which was created by Netflix. And it was $1 million Netflix recommendation engine challenge. And a group of mathematicians from UCLA actually solved it and got the best results for Netflix, and they received the award and the money for it. And that was, UCLA is also known for being sort of the birthplace of the internet, but that was a second wave in something that is particularly close to me today. I focus my energy on the intersection of user experience and AI. And those two different sciences were effectively combining for one of the first times in this highly commercially visible way when I was at UCLA. So I guess, timing really matters in the world. And I was really lucky to be there at this particular time. I later went to work at Google. And at Google, I was focusing on exactly the same problem, the intersection of user experience and artificial intelligence. So our team at Google was responsible for optimizing Google.coms, so the search experience in particular, but with an eye on the ad, the parts of the searches that actually were displaying ads, right? So the part of Google.com that was monetized. Our focus was to help users get better commercial experiences, but also of course, getting advertisers better results and ultimately also creating better financial results for Alphabet. That's when I really learned that UX was an incredibly powerful lever. Our team would do about 6 to 12% growth every year for Alphabet. Alphabet was growing 23% year over year. So some years our team was basically responsible for half of the total growth. And again, not because we were, particularly smart, although I did work with the brightest minds there that I've ever had the chance to work with. But it's because we were giving this gigantic traffic with most of the money being made on ads for Google. So every single percent of optimization that we would find in the user experience would directly go to the bottom line of Alphabet and would be really, really impactful for the company. So amongst other things, there were two sort of key levers that I focused on. One of them was UX in particular. So we would run hundreds of A/B tests every year, and those would generate a lot of value for Google. The second was automation in particular. So there's this product, if some of you marketers are listening today, it's called responsive search ads. You might have used it. It's actually the primary way today that you enter text ads into AdWords, or now it's called Google Ads. And that product was effectively my product from invention all the way to the end of making it the main way. And the idea there was that we noticed when we had more inventory as Alphabet, more ad copy inventory, then the advertisements would actually work better because the algorithm that we developed to select which ad to show for which search actually was really, really powerful. So if we could feed more inventory to this algorithm, we could effectively get better results for advertisers. In other words, you can have a more specific ad for every single search that people were making, right? So we developed effectively a GPT-3 before GPT-3 existed. Some of you that don't know what GPT-3 is, it's basically text generation algorithm, right? So we taught machines how to write copy based on all of the data that we had of how humans were writing copy before, and of course, what ads were highly performant. So it's quite a cool experience to be on that team. It took, I think, 5 years in total to get from the initial stage all the way to the end. Actually, originally when we started, we didn't use AI to write the ads. We had a gigantic copywriting team responsible for hiring a couple thousand people all around the world to mimic what the AI would do before we had the AI, to prove that there would be results in sort of focusing on the AI approach. And then over time, we managed to automate the whole thing and actually create a really cool product that advertisers also love and like to use today. So that's kind of my story before Datamilk. I left Google and went back to what was really dear to my heart, which is actually trying to start companies and building organizations rather than building products. And I left Google and I went on a mission to, I would say, leverage my knowledge as much as possible and helping democratize it and giving it as a tool to the rest of the world, because obviously I was really, really lucky to be where I was. And I think everybody should have a shot, despite, not everybody having the experiences that I did. So that's kind of the idea behind the company.
It sounds really, really interesting, Peter. And something that you mentioned, right, when you were working at Google and optimizing the monetizing the search, right? You mentioned like small increments in those sites with massive traffic, how this small optimization, small increments can compound to literally millions of dollars, right? So can you, because I heard this from you before, but I would like you to share with your audience, can you share the experience about the experiment about the shades of blue in the search results?
Yeah.
And how that has a massive impact? Because I think that really portrays the importance of A/B testing and how differences in shades of blue can make a huge impact. Of course, in massive traffic sites, but as an example, I think it serves for every e-commerce business.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. So this is a famous public story and something that my team worked on, but we tried, I think, over. Sorry. I think so. This is a famous public story, and that's something that my team worked on over the course of a 6-month project. We set up to try a lot of different shades of blue on the links, right? So all the results on Google are typically blue to indicate clickability. We knew that the blue was very important in humans reacting to go to click on the element. So we ended up running, a lot of variants, over a dozen, and we found that was a very good lever. And the lesson here, is we spend a lot of time thinking about UX from the perspective of convenience, and finding logical things that work. But the world of UX is larger than the typical things that people think about. The world of UX is everything from you seeing a screen and forming a first perception to a lot of subliminal thoughts happening in your brain that are quickly flashing through, and you can't even necessarily rationalize exactly what's happening in that split second, but you're making a decision to move on or not. And those tiny decisions compound into very large potential gains, right? But also, for a lot of these things, it's not really worth, in my opinion, to spend human hours and great minds thinking about those problems that are way bigger and complex things that humans can design. And machines are quite good at solving these types of problems. Yeah, and this is one of the directions that DataMilk believes in general, is that automation in any industry, and AI in particular is a great vehicle for automation, can drive humans towards freeing up space and time to do better, greater things. So the mundane tasks that you had to do of maybe running 12 different color versions on your site shouldn't really be something that you're spending your time on, right? That's something that you can outsource to a machine, and that frees up your time and creativity and space to work on bigger problems that are impossible today, or maybe forever will be impossible for machines to do. So I went through that pain at Google of manually doing this work, but I also understood that what I was doing didn't actually require a person to be there. So if we can use automation in this perspective over time as society, that means there will be more value and benefit and more time to actually do meaningful things with our life. So that's a particular aspect of our company that I find really, really exciting.
So Peter, from what I'm hearing, and I'll try to oversimplify this, right? But basically, you're using mathematical models to hack into human psychology, right? To be able to produce results, monetary results. Is that a correct oversimplification?
I think that's to some extent one of the parts of what we do, right? But generally speaking, DataMilk is a company. The longer vision and the hypothesis behind it, right, is that we've gone through this age of accumulating data, right? So everything that we do online today is being recorded in one fashion or the other. And there's two problems with this state. The first problem is that a lot of it is happening quite badly. There's such a thing as privacy, for example.
Okay.
And we should be really mindful of exactly what information we're collecting. And when someone walks into a physical store in the world, they don't need to tell you their name, their email address, and so forth, just to look around the store and have a good experience. But we've gone and we've changed the internet as is into a very greedy data collection facility, ignoring that people don't actually want that because it was good for the companies. And there's been a fight back against that by society and now by regulators and even by industry. And that's the general trend that we should go towards. As a user of the internet myself, I believe that I should not be giving away personal information unless I'm absolutely clear on what I'm doing it for and why, right? And most situations online don't require you to share this personal information. Another problem with the data...
Basically what you're saying, excuse me for interrupting, basically what you're saying is that you don't need to bother the customer to get information to be relevant for them because you can obtain it in other ways without bugging them, correct?
I believe so. There's a right space and a right time for different pieces of information that should be requested from the user. And there should be always a very clear and obvious reason why that information is necessary at that step. The person shouldn't be double guessing, why am I giving my email address right now? Their IP address shouldn't be something that is used to target them across websites. We shouldn't be in a greedy fashion trying to connect cookies all around the internet to build your profile without the knowledge of the person to do that. And we're taking steps as a society to prevent that to happen, and this is a really good thing. There's another aspect, which is it's just incredibly dangerous as well. Effectively, everybody who's lived through these past 10, 15 years of the internet, their identity is entirely exposed online. You can go on the black market and literally find anyone's email address, phone number, physical address, date of birth, most information that's needed for identity theft. That is incredibly dangerous. And we're going to pay the price as a society for that if we don't actually make a change. So these are sensible and good sort of innovations and directions that we're taking in the world of the internet. Furthermore,
and actually, let me tie that back. What you're saying, tie back from a statement that you have in your website, actually, that people use or merchants use just 10% of the information that they can obtain from their customers' interactions in their website, right? And you actually, in a very broad terms, you talk about product clicks and purchases, but you also state that there's a 90% of information that's unused that can be interpreted as attention signals, and that is the data that you can use to be relevant for them, not just asking the email.
Correct. The real world example of this is any time that two human beings are communicating, right? There's a lot of signals besides the basic words that are transpiring between the two. If you pay attention to people's gestures, to how their mood is shaping, right? You can tell so much about exactly what they want, what they feel is good, bad, etc., right? And so it comes down to the point of if you actually care about someone, you should pay attention to them in sort of a wholesome way, right? You should try to look at all the signals that they're sending you because they're interacting with you, right? That interaction is a two-way communication channel. They're sending you information. And so it's the same on the internet. When someone comes and visits a website, they do a lot of things. I mean, we estimated people take on average over 60 clicks just to get to starting checkout. So that's just clicks, right? I mean, imagine all the pages they look at, how they're scrolling, they're discovering various aspects of the product. And they're interested, they're excited, they want to know, but they're also indicating to the business what they care about. If you had a salesperson inside a physical retail store and you could actually pay attention to the customers, right? Step in at the right moment when you notice that they're confused. Let them be.
So if you pay attention, you'll understand what they care about and what is it that drives their attention, right?
That's it. It's not a complicated sort of idea. It's an idea of expanding on our listening skills to people, but doing it in a way that is privacy first and that cannot harm them in any sort of way. And that's the idea behind the first idea behind our company, right? Is that there's all of this data available. It's being collected incorrectly. It's help companies collect it. But it's not enough to drown these companies in more data. You have to give them actual valuable use cases. And those use cases,
data, basically.
Right. I mean, for people who are...
Don't just store the data just because and read numbers, but do something about it.
That's right. I mean, we grew up largely
in the problem, right?
In the age of like heat maps, right? I've gone through these exercises with heat maps. They can be fruitful to some extent, but surely there's a more direct way of leveraging this information to actually make the user experience better, right? And that's the second half of what we focus on. So don't just collect the data, collect it responsibly in a clean way, in a privacy first way, but also make good use of it very, very easily. That's the second aspect of our business. And so you asked when we started a little bit earlier, this part of the discussion, you asked, is it psychological things? It doesn't really matter what it is. As long as you can leverage that data to make the user experience perform better, then DataMilk feels like it's succeeded in its mission to help you. And some of those may be psychological things today, but some of those may be entirely of different nature. They can be along the lines of discovery, along the lines of figuring out when to bug people versus not bug people, right? And, we know very well from our favorite airline industries is that once someone is pretty set on buying something, you can upsell them to buy more things, right? This is also how most retailers work. When you already get to the cashier, you start getting bombarded with chocolates, drinks, whatever the hell it is that they want to cross-sell you on, right? And so that's also something related to the data. If you know when someone's ready to buy, you can decide to leverage that information to change your user experience, to adapt it to them. So there's a large set of things. They're all connected around attention data and making it easy to use to make the user experience more performant.
And tell me, Peter, how is it that, because you have different products and you have actually put together different products in what DataMilk serves and the market that you cater. So can you explain our audience how those products, for instance, smart navigation or select FOMO, right? How those products work, how you use this algorithms to identify who's browsing and what is it that they pay attention to, and how to start putting in front of them the relevant products without, like you said, without needing to bugging them with asking, presenting in a service or asking them to leave their email addresses.
Sure. Yeah, so let's take smart navigation. I think it's a good example, right? So one of the things that we're trying to help and are helping commerce companies with is this is in the realm of discovery, right? So once someone is on a certain product or a collection of products, or given what they've done in their history, you want to make it as easy for them to navigate to their next objective, right? So that's what smart navigation achieves. It helps users navigate to the right next step. But what does it mean to identify the right next step, right? From our perspective in the world of commerce, it can be described with the following offline situation. And I go back to this because for me, it's very easy to understand, right? So imagine you have a store and you have a salesperson in that store. And that salesperson is really, really paying attention to what the person who is the potential customer is doing in the store. And the person walks in and they go through the first aisle. And you can notice that they're gravitating to shiny white things, right? The immediate thought for the salesperson should be, we have quite a good set of inventory of shiny white things. Why don't I help them bring them a bunch of these things, right? So that's exactly what the product does. First, it looks at, given what someone has done, it finds other people who have performed similar actions. It looks at what those people then gravitated towards and surfaces those options to the next customer. But that is not enough, right? Because the salesperson gets paid actually on commission, right? So if you have a large set of white, shiny objects that you sell as a business, it matters which one of them you give to the person, right? In other words, you have to simultaneously satisfy the interest of the user and the interest of the business. And you want to actually feed the things that are more expensive if you're a good salesperson, right? So the combination of these two objectives comes together as a really nice algorithm, because if you can predict whether the person would be interested in a particular page, which is a collection of products, and then you understand what is the expected value once someone lands on that particular page, which is an ever-changing equation, right? You can combine these two and place the right thing that not only the person will want to see, but also will deliver value for the business.
It's really interesting how you present it. Actually, I want to go back a little bit through something that we mentioned briefly, and those are the tension signals, right? Because whenever you're also explaining this offline examples, you mentioned, like, for instance, this salesperson that pays attention to X, Y, Z signals, right? So can you briefly explain us, like, what are attention signals and what you feel the most important for the different objectives of an e-commerce store that we need to pay attention to, and that actually DataMilk pays attention to?
Yeah. What we typically look at are various signals across how you're interacting with the content that's displayed to you, right? So if you take a product listing page, maybe the customer pauses on some set of products. Maybe they don't, right? Maybe they go to the product, then they read the description. Maybe they don't. Maybe they pause to look at the price. Maybe they're looking at the size options and they add it to cart. They don't add it to cart. They remove something from cart, right? There's a million of these interactions that happen. And our approach is that businesses should try to collect as many of them as possible, because we have this incredible tool, which is called artificial intelligence, that is actually able to discern which one of those signals are useful and which ones are not. So we don't have to think about, is this necessarily going to be useful for this particular problem? We can collect it, we can feed it into the algorithm, we can let the algorithm figure out if that particular signal was useful for the problem that we're solving. So that's kind of the approach that we're taking, right? And, I've heard from some customers, for example, that it really matters for returns, for example, if someone actually read the description of the product or not. Because some people are really hasty about clicking through and buying something, and that results in a ton of returns, right? So that is we're not helping with this particular problem, right? But if you think creatively about this information and how valuable it can be, you start identifying a lot of potential use cases for it. And it is our mission to eventually help with all of those problems. Of course, we're starting with the easiest ones that drive the majority, as much as the value as possible, the maximum amount of value, right? But eventually, we want to cover as much of these use cases as possible.
And Peter, how do you automate the tests, right? Because you gather that information, you start listening to those attention signals, right? And you have the different products. But you mentioned, and I know that DataMilk actually automates the testing, right? How does that work? And it works in real time as well, right?
Yeah. So the way that this works is it's to some extent semi-automated, yeah? So the part that we feel very strongly about, a person should never do, is decide which particular variant actually wins in any sort of way, especially in a multivariate world. You don't necessarily have to have a single answer to a problem, right? If you think about it in another way, the human is really good at coming up with reasonable ideas. Yeah. So if we create a machine where a human can easily load a lot of reasonable ideas into the software, and then the machine figures out which one of those it should show exactly in which situation, you get a very static side to a very dynamic state very, very quickly, and you get a lot of performance out of it, but also with minimal effort. And this is exactly how DataMilk works. We create a tool set of ideas. We call these ideas smart components, and we make it very easy to install those on sites. In fact, they're so easy to install these ideas, to load the ideas into the store, that we take that work on ourselves to help our customers because they're really strained on resources and on time. Yeah. So ultimately we decide, let's load this idea in, let's load that idea in, let's load this idea in, let's load that idea in. And then we let the artificial intelligence to observe each one of these ideas, especially in combination with each other, and display each idea at the right moment to the right person so that it maximizes the performance of the site.
Do you have an internal process to be able to help you decide which idea to implement first from your smart components?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So I say this to our engineers quite a bit. We're actually not a pure software company. I think of it more as a
strategy,
as a factory. I think of it as a smart component factory. Yeah. So our goal is to produce as many of these smart components that are interesting to our customers. They want to try them. B, they leverage attention data to function. C, they're widely applicable to a lot of the internet. And D, they actually produce results. So we go through, all the time, the process of ideating, running experiments on customer sites initially, proving that it has value, and ultimately productizing those ideas to become actual official smart components that we display on the site. Yeah. In some extent, it is, we're in a lucky position. We have a lot of customers, so we can be a centralized agency that tries things on various sites, and then we can transfer the learnings from one site to the other. So the next customer that comes in benefits from the previous customer joining because previous customers saw results from a particular component. If the next customer is similar to them, they're likely also going to experience a similar result.
And how would you rank your components? Like, what would you say a merchant that's not using DataMilk, like what's maybe the best component to start with and to start seeing results? Maybe we should name the different components. You have smart navigation, smart select, smart FOMO, smart social proof, related searches, discover more, smart button, and smart sort, correct?
Yes.
Just listing those.
Yeah. So the focus is to stop thinking in your typical A/B testing way, right? You're no longer constrained by time. The best result is to load as many of the ideas in as possible. Nobody.
Okay, so you would use all of them at the same time?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because the only reason you weren't doing that before is because you had to go through manual effort to produce it. So you were like, how many of these can I handle in a given period of time, right? The machine now freed you from this. You can throw ideas on the side, and the AI will figure out what to show and to whom and when. And that makes the process way more optimal.
So basically, the real power is between the interaction of all these smart components working together at the same time, correct?
Correct. That's right.
And Peter, you actually, your statement in your site, in your website, is that you can earn a 6 to 12% extra profit from UX. right? Using this smart components. When would merchants start seeing results? Like, is it something that you start seeing results almost immediately? You need to start feeding or even feed more traffic to the site. How does the process work once you install the smart components?
Yeah,
to start seeing that revenue increase, of course.
So given that this is an AI product, right? We actually need quite a bit of data of observing users before we can even get started with the optimization. So typically we don't work with customers that have less than 1 million sessions a month. Yeah, so about 1 million visits a month to the site. So when the software starts working really, really well. And above, sky is the limit. The more, the better, honestly. So the typical process for us is the following. In the beginning, the customers integrate. The AI is simply observing the user behavior, collecting the attention data. Yeah, that lasts for about 500,000 sessions and 2 weeks. So both of these need to be satisfied because you want to make sure that you're not biasing your data on a single day. So you want to see a longer period, but you also need sufficient data for the AI models to train. So once you go through this process, you can start activating smart components. So from that moment on, smart components are activated. Depending on your size, you can see statistically significant results from anywhere between a day to say 90 days. Yeah. It's going to depend on the traffic, on the size of the results, which will also be increasing over time. So there are a number of factors that drive the statistical confidence in the results. But ultimately, some customers saw very large gains the next day, which was, of course,
really
super cool experience for them, as you can imagine. So that's kind of how it works. We also do a lot of stuff because we're basically a data infrastructure company, right? So we take data super seriously. We have to do a lot of things along the lines of making sure that our data systems function appropriately, that we're cleaning the data correctly. So one of the things that we do, which I think is super important, is we run actually a 50-50 experiment, A/B test, on the side, where we entirely turn off data milk in one arm and we turn on data milk in the other. So in other words, half of the sessions that come to your website will see your original site without any changes, and half of the sessions will see it with data milk turned on. And that's how you will know statistically confidently the value of data milk. And furthermore, we are going to continuously, even after you are satisfied with the results and we turn up the traffic, we're going to keep some portion of the traffic unoptimized. You're going to see the original site. So you're not going to lose sense of the baseline of how your site is performing.
You'll always have a control.
You always have a control, and so you'll always know exactly how much value data milk is actually generating for you, right? Which, given that the world can change, your website can change, users' behavior can change, the composition of your traffic can change, a lot of things can change. You want to know at every point, even that you're paying to process your attention data to a company, you want to know exactly how much value you're getting out of it, right? And so you're able to answer that with 100% confidence, with direct attribution to exactly every single cent that you spent with data milk, how much more did I get out of it? But that's not where it ends.
That's one of the biggest concerns of many merchants, like real attribution, like understanding to the cent how much return I'm getting from each tool, right? You're solving it with what you just mentioned.
That's right. And in the world where you have statistics, that shouldn't be a question, But yet, a lot of vendors, of course, they are not as academically rigorous as us. So, we believe that this is important innovation. This transparency is very important for the market. People should rejoice for knowing exactly how much they earn compared to how much they're spending. What I was going to say is that we actually went even further with this. Yeah. So for those, who are used to looking at costs versus how much profit you earn from spending, that's kind of sounds like a marketing problem, right? So if you're actually buying traffic for your e-commerce store, you're going to be potentially doing it on a gross profit return on ad spend basis or some form of that, right? So what you'll do is you'll pay Instagram or TikTok these days, or Google, whatever it may be. You're going to pay them per click, impression, whatever. At the moment that you're paying, you don't actually know if that person is going to convert, right? So you're betting every time, hoping to get the returns. Now, what we've done with our product is there is no betting. Basically, we first generate you the extra cash flow because we already optimized your site and we can tell you how much more extra money you made. And only then we ask you, hey, pay for the data, the attention data that you processed, right? So if you're happy with the results, you pay. If you don't get the returns, you're free to leave and you don't have to pay the company anything. That aligns us with our customers in a financial way, perfect possible way. So I think that's also very important.
I love how you frame it about the attention data, right? It really makes it more relevant and gives it more power, right? That understanding what your customers are really interested in. I think it's a very good way to frame it and to position it.
Thank you.
And Peter, you mentioned you're also a factory, right? A smart component factory. Do you have any smart component in the making? Any new product?
Yeah, we're constantly looking at various ideas. Some of the ideas that you see on our site, we sort of forward display them on the site because we're collecting also interest from our customers, right? So they'll look through our website, they'll tell us which one of these are more interesting to them or not. So actually, about half of the ideas that you see on the website today are still in development. We've only existed as a company for about 2 years, so we're still very early in our journey. But we have ideas across the board, from how to gamify websites to how to TikTokify e-commerce sites.
Tell me a little bit more about how to gamify websites.
Sure. So one sort of idea that we've been toying with is actually offering users who are borderline on making a decision to buy or not, right? So not 100% certain, but sort of in that gray area where they might need a nudge, to offer them carbon credits. So planting trees in exchange for them making the decision to go forward, right? You can basically reward any action on the site, which you're recording through the attention data, right? So you can say, okay, I want you to look at some more products right now. I'll start running up the carbon credit meter that you're donating every time, a portion of a tree when you're doing something beneficial. So there's a lot of ways to go about it. It just depends on exactly which part of the journey someone is. Sometimes they're still early in their discovery and you want them to spend more time digging through the site. Sometimes they're getting closer to purchase. You want to nudge them right over the edge, right? So that's one sort of interesting and cool idea that we've been playing with.
Cool. And let me also ask you about how to, you mentioned TikTokify or whatever that word might be, a website. Like what is it that you're finding that you can use, what experiences that are happening in TikTok you can use in the website?
Yeah, so TikTok has always been an inspiration for me, right? If you actually consider the development of the internet, they've really been the winner of this age of attention data, this age of hyper private internet that still leverages data in creative ways to create good experiences. In fact, on TikTok, when you go and you download the app, you don't even have to register. right? You can just start using it. It's when you become a creator that you want to register because you're interested in trying yourself out as one of the next influencers, which I'm sure we all will be at one point. But in order to just use it and get relevant content, you don't really need to. So TikTok has basically won through their very creative ways of combining cutting edge algorithms with attention data. They literally look at every single tiny signal of how you're interacting with the content, and then they very quickly load the next video for you based on your prior interaction. What that results in for TikTok is that they've this year now surpassed every other attention focused social media platform in average watch time per user, in total watch time, and now in total ad revenue as well. They've surpassed YouTube. So it's been an incredible sort of journey for them and a very, very rapid rise. And they do this because close to 95% of their watch time actually comes through these view through recommendations that occur by being very reactive, by paying attention to what the users are doing with the content. So that's been a great inspiration for us. We believe that we can port over some of these infinite experiences onto e-commerce. So one sort of very easy way to portray the gap between the two is go on any e-commerce site's homepage and you'll see a mishmash of strange merchandising strategies prioritized based on how loud the different merchandising teams are in the organization, right? So the banner, which will have sliders of different offers that covers the whole front page of the site, clearly not the best way to use your real estate, but it's driven by basically internal politics of these organizations fighting for the attention of the user. A much better way to do it is what you get on TikTok. Just pop people in to as many products as they can see immediately because they came to your store to look at that. They didn't come to your store to look at your banners, right?
Exactly. Actually, there's an example that I think that you present in your website, if I recall correctly, that reminds me of what you explained about TikTok. That if I'm scrolling, let's assume I'm in my mobile phone, right, a smartphone. I'm scrolling, and I stop for a split second on shoes, for instance, right? That can be an attention signal that I can be interested in shoes. So you're gonna smart show me other shoes. So you're going to collect more data. If I stop there, you know that it's about shoes, right? For example. And you're not going to show me T-shirts because I scrolled past the T-shirts. So I went to shoes. So that split second, would it be a correct assumption that that's kind of the TikTokify of the website? Like,
yeah.
Understand that split second that draw my attention to a specific product. Show me more about that.
I think that's exactly one of the important long-term changes that we need to make in e-commerce. We need to drop the current approach to these static sites, and we need to get people to spend time in an entertainment-like way. They came to the store to see the products. Let's give them these products. Let them help them browse.
Let's show them what they're looking for, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. And then once, they've already looked at some stuff and they've exhibited that they're ready to buy, then change the experience, right? Change it from this browsy point of a store to a very straightforward, go get it done, get them over the line type of funnel-like experience. So,
because basically you're also starting from a premise, like, correct me if I'm wrong, right? This is an assumption. The more time they are in your site, the more probability to make a purchase, right? It's more probable for them to make a purchase. So, let's keep their attention. Let's keep them in our site with what they want, not with what we want to show them, right? So the more we keep them, the more we entertain them, the more probable they're going to make a purchase from us. And as well, it impacts in everything, because it's going to impact in, for instance, SEO rankings.
That's correct. And look, I don't think the user actually knows exactly what they want. Yeah. But I believe they go for certain aspects of things that they want.
But they give you hints.
Exactly. And the right balance between following the hints, but without being too presumptuous, but still satisfying your business objective of showing them the products that actually give you margin, right, is what I'm talking about here. And certainly, I believe that people have two modes. They have the mode of, I'm here to look at content and get entertainment out of the store because it's actually fun to go through these products. I mean, you as companies do a tremendous job at driving the selection of your inventory, or even creating the selection of your inventory. People get value and entertainment out of looking through that. That's wonderful. That's one of the modes, is this is fun. I'm browsing. But the other mode is, I know that I want something. And you got to also support that mode. And that's the intricacy of commerce, right?
Delicate balance, right?
Exactly. To that extent, it's even a harder problem than TikTok's, which is just greedily show. They have that problem in advertising, actually, because that's how they make money. So they want to distract you and show you, but not distract you too much. In the world of commerce, it's less about ads and it's about that final purchase decision, right? But nevertheless, if you think of this sort of bimodal behavior, and you also don't think of it linearly, just because someone was browsing, they found something they like, doesn't mean that their browsing is over. How many times do you go to the store? You're like, cheese, right? Okay, show me all the cheeses. Here comes the cheese expert. Tells you that this is the best French cheese. Of course, it's the most expensive one. You're like, great, this sounds awesome. I'm super happy. And then you're like, bananas, So you can move between these modes. It's not a linear process. It's not a funnel like it is on some sign up sort of type of website.
It's more chaotic, right? And
yes.
The algorithm will allow you to understand that chaos in a way.
Yes.
To put order.
That's the dream, at least.
That's the dream. Perfect. Peter, we're coming to an end. And the last thing that I want to ask you is, like, what's your vision in all of this? Like, what do you think we're going to be in terms of e-commerce in the next 5 years, and how AI and predictive tools and attention tools like Datamilk are going to help that transformation?
Yeah, I think we're going to live in a world where there are no more static experiences, where every single part of the page will be adaptive to exactly the users and the business's needs. And that transformation takes a long time, because we are also coming from a place of infrastructure that didn't even allow for that, right? We couldn't actually build the internet in this way. We started with something that was, like MySpace walls, and it was cool to even put a background on a website and add a button, And now we're really in a different age where we have all kinds of cool technologies like React, right? That allow us to componentize the experience. And you can really get to an infinitely variable user experience that's constantly changing and adapting to the person. So now technology allows us to do so, but we have to do it in a responsible and efficient way. And Datamilk wants to be there to help you achieve exactly that vision.
Beautiful. Peter Szalontai, thank you very much for joining us today. Can you remind us where people can find you, where they can reach you?
Yeah, you guys can Google Datamilk and you'll get to datamilk.ai. You can also find me on LinkedIn by Googling me. I think my official role is Data Goat. at Data
Yeah,
Mill. So,
I love that one.
I'm always open for meeting anyone and having discussions. I really enjoy talking to folks and sharing what I know and hearing from them, their experiences, learning from them. So please don't be shy to come knock on my digital door.
Beautiful. Peter, thank you very much for joining us. Thanks everyone for watching. This is it for today's episode. I'm Diego Praderi, and this is The Link. Have a good one. Bye-bye.